I think we should try an open marriage, she said, her voice casual, like she was suggesting a new restaurant for date night. I set my fork down, my appetite vanishing. You're joking. She wasn't. Natalie sighed, reaching for her wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid before taking a sip. Mark, we've been together for over a decade. We love each other, but don't you feel like something's missing? The excitement, the thrill. Her words sent a cold wave through my chest. I stared at her, trying to decipher if this was really my wife sitting before me or some stranger who had taken her place. Excitement. I repeated, my voice tighter than I intended. Natalie, we have 2 kids, a home, a life together. You want to risk all of that for what? Random sex. She tilted her head, and for the first time, I noticed something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Anticipation. Not random, she corrected. Meaningful experiences. Something new. The air between us felt suffocating. So you're saying you want to sleep with other men? I'm saying we both should, she said, placing her hand over mine. It could bring us closer. I looked down at her fingers, soft and familiar, and yet suddenly foreign. My mind reeled with questions. Was I not enough for her? Had she already been with someone else and was just now admitting it? I pulled my hand away. And if I say no? She sighed again, softer this time. Then we don't do it. But I want you to think about it. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while Natalie dozed peacefully beside me. The thought of another man touching her made my stomach turn, yet there was another, quieter voice in the back of my mind, one whispering that maybe she had a point. Had we grown stale? Had we let the years dull the fire we once had? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. Our marriage would never be the same after this conversation. The next day, my mind was still a storm. At work, I went through the motions, answering emails, attending meetings, but I wasn't really there. All I could think about was Natalie's proposal. When I came home, I was greeted not by my wife, but by someone else, Katie, our 23-year-old nanny. She was sitting on the living room floor, playing with our youngest, her golden hair falling over one shoulder as she laughed at something my daughter said. She glanced up and smiled. Rough day. I forced a chuckle. You have no idea. She stood, stretching slightly. Katie had always been attractive, young, full of energy, with an easy confidence that made her seem older than her years. I had never thought of her in that way before, but now, with my wife's words still echoing in my head, I found myself noticing the way her t-shirt clung to her curves, the way her lips parted slightly when she tilted her head in concern. What's on your mind? She asked. I hesitated. It's nothing. She gave me a knowing look. Mark, I've worked for you guys for 2 years now. I know when something's wrong. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. It's Natalie. She wants an open marriage. Katie blinked. Oh, she didn't react with shock or judgment, just quiet understanding. And how do you feel about that? I don't know, I admitted. Betrayed? Confused? Part of me wants to tell her she's crazy, but another part of me wonders if she's right. Katie was silent for a moment, then she nodded. That's a lot to process. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, you could say that. She hesitated, then reached out, placing a hand on my arm. It was a small gesture, but it sent an unexpected jolt through me. For what it's worth, she said softly, I think she's making a mistake. Her words hung between us, heavy with something unspoken. For the first time since Natalie's proposal, I felt something other than confusion. I felt seen, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. I told myself I wasn't going to think about it anymore, that I would shut the door on Natalie's suggestion, tell her outright that I wasn't interested, and we'd go back to normal. But normal had already left the building. Natalie didn't bring it up again for a few days, acting as if the conversation had never happened. If I didn't know better, I would have thought she'd change her mind, but the signs were there. The late-night texts she tried to hide. The way she started dressing differently. Tighter jeans, low-cut tops she hadn't worn in years. The way she laughed a little too much at her phone. Then came the night she told me she was going out with friends. She was wearing a black dress that hugged her body, her makeup done in a way that made her look like she was on a first date. I stood in the bedroom doorway, watching her put in earrings, my chest tightening. Who's going to be there? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She glanced at me through the mirror. Just some people from work. Men. Her hand stilled for a fraction of a second before she resumed. Yeah, Mark, men exist. I forced a chuckle. That's not what I meant. She turned, stepping toward me, resting her hands on my chest. Look, I know this is weird for you, but I don't want to fight about it. I want to feel free for a little bit. No expectations. No pressure. I swallowed the lump in my throat. And me? She tilted her head. What about you? What do I do while you're out feeling free? Natalie gave me a small smile. Whatever you want. Then she kissed my cheek and walked out the door. I stood there for a long time, listening to the faint sound of her heels on the driveway, the car starting, then silence. She had left, and I had never felt more alone. Katie found me outside on the porch an hour later, staring at the empty driveway with a beer in my hand. She must have sensed something was off because she sat down beside me without a word, pulling her knees to her chest. She left, didn't she? Katie finally asked. I exhaled slowly. Yeah. Silence stretched between us, comfortable but charged. The night air was cool, and I was suddenly aware of how close she was, our shoulders nearly touching. You don't have to be alone tonight, Katie said softly, turning her head toward me. I looked at her, and for the first time, I let myself really look at her. She was beautiful. Young, yes, but not in a way that made her seem inexperienced. There was something in her eyes, something wise, something knowing. You don't have to say that, I murmured. I'm not just saying it. I clenched my jaw, looking away. You don't understand. This isn't just about sex. Then what is it about? I turned back to her, my chest tightening. It's about trust. It's about waking up one day and realizing the person you built your whole life with is suddenly different. Katie was silent for a moment. Then she reached out, her fingers brushing mine where they rested on my knee. You deserve better, she whispered. It wasn't the words that undid me. It was the way she said them, the raw honesty in her voice. For the first time since Natalie's proposal, I felt something warm in my chest, and that scared me more than anything. The days blurred together after that. Natalie dove headfirst in her newfound freedom, coming home late, sneaking glances at her phone, laughing at texts she wouldn't let me see. And I did nothing. I told myself I was giving her space, that this was just a phase, that she would come back to me, realize what she had, and we'd put this behind us. But deep down, I knew the truth. She wasn't coming back. One night, she came home past midnight, the smell of cologne clinging to her like a second skin. I was still awake, sitting on the couch, staring at the TV without really watching it. She paused in the doorway, looking at me with something like guilt. You're still up? I turned off the TV and stood. Yeah. She shifted, uncomfortable. Mark, I don't want to fight. I stepped closer. Are you sleeping with someone? Her breath hitched. Mark, just tell me. My voice was calm, steady, but inside, I was already breaking. She hesitated for only a second. But that was enough. She didn't need to answer. I already knew. Natalie lowered her gaze. It's new. It's exciting. I closed my eyes. Jesus, Nachi. You could do it too, she whispered, reaching for my arm. We could still make this work. You just need to try. I pulled away before she could touch me. I think you already made your choice. Natalie's face fell, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. I walked past her, leaving her standing there, confused, regretful, but not enough to stop what she had started. As I climbed the stairs to bed, I realized something. I didn't care if she came back to me anymore, because maybe, just maybe, I was already moving on, and maybe, just maybe, I was starting to see Katie in a different light. The storm rolled in fast that night, thick clouds swallowing the moon, the wind howling through the trees like a warning I couldn't quite understand. Rain drummed against the windows, drowning out the silence that had taken root in my home ever since Natalie decided our marriage wasn't enough for her anymore. She wasn't home. Again, I wasn't sure where she was. And for the first time, I didn't care. Instead, I was in the kitchen with Katie. The power had gone out a half hour ago, and with 2 kids upstairs who hated the dark, Katie had worked fast to light candles, her movements calm and practiced, a quiet steadiness I had come to rely on more than I wanted to admit. Here, she said, handing me a flashlight. I already put a few in the kids' room, but I figured you'd want one too. I took it, our fingers brushing. Just a touch. A second too long. Thanks, I murmured. She smiled, small, reassuring, but there was something else behind it. Something new. Something dangerous. We sat on the couch together after that, the flickering candlelight casting shadows against the walls, the air thick with something unspoken. Outside, the wind howled, the house creaked, the world felt smaller. Closer. Katie pulled her legs up onto the couch, tucking them beneath her. She was wearing shorts and one of Natalie's old sweatshirts, oversized on her smaller frame, the neckline slipping off one shoulder. I don't think I ever told you, she said softly, but my parents divorced when I was 10. Ich glänzte her, so peist. I didn't know that. She shrugged, playing with a loose thread on the sleeve of her sweatshirt. My dad had an affair. My mom tried to forgive him, but once trust is gone, it's gone, you know? I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Yeah, I know. Silence settled between us again, heavier this time. I should have moved. I should have put space between us. But I didn't. Katie shifted, turning slightly toward me, her knee brushing against mine. Mark! I looked at her then. Really looked at her. She was beautiful. Not just in the obvious way. The golden hair, the bright green eyes, the soft curve she never flaunted. It was more than that. It was the way she listened, the way she saw me when Natalie didn't. And in that moment, I realized I wanted her. It hit me fast like a car crash. A full-body ache, deep and unfamiliar. I had spent so long feeling like nothing. Like an afterthought. A placeholder. But when Katie looked at me like that, I felt like a man again. Her breath hitched, her eyes flickering down to my lips. A choice. I could pull away. I could remind myself of everything I had to lose. Or I could take what I wanted for once. The storm raged outside, wind shaking the house, thunder rolling across the sky. And then, before I could think, before I could stop myself, I kissed her. Her lips were soft, hesitant for only a moment before she melted into me. A sharp, desperate inhale. Her hands sliding up my chest, fingers curling into my shirt. I pulled her closer, my hand moving to her thigh, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath my fingertips. It was electric. It was dangerous. And it was exactly what I needed. She let out a soft, breathy sigh, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. And for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Natalie. I wasn't thinking about my failing marriage, about the nights I spent alone, about the coldness in my wife's eyes whenever she looked at me. I was thinking about Katie, about the way she tasted, about the way her body felt against mine. And for the first time in months, I felt alive. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Minutes? Hours? Time blurred. But then Katie pulled back, her lips swollen, her breathing uneven. Mark, she whispered. We can't. She was right. Of course she was right. But I didn't want to hear it. I ran a hand down my face, exhaling sharply. Jesus. She swallowed hard, her eyes searching mine. I should go. I didn't stop her. Didn't say a word as she stood, adjusting her sweatshirt, running a shaky hand through her hair. Didn't stop her as she turned toward the hallway, hesitating for just a second. But then she was gone, disappearing into the dark, leaving me alone with nothing but the taste of her on my lips and the sharp, gut-wrenching realization that I had just made everything a hell of a lot more complicated. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt Katie's lips on mine, the warmth of her body pressed against me, the way her breath had hitched when I touched her. It played in my mind like a loop, taunting me, making me crave something I had no business wanting. By the time morning came, I wasn't sure if I regretted what happened, or if I wanted more. I told myself I'd act normal, that what happened between Katie and me was a mistake, a moment of weakness fueled by loneliness and frustration. I'd apologize, pretend it never happened, and we'd move on. But the second I saw her in the kitchen the next morning, I knew forgetting wasn't an option. She stood by the counter, pouring a cup of coffee, dressed in her usual leggings and a loose t-shirt. She looked up when I walked in, her green eyes widening slightly before she quickly looked away. "Morning," she murmured. "Morning." My voice was rough, strained. We didn't mention last night, but we didn't need to. The tension between us was thick, suffocating. Every time she moved, every time she shifted her weight or tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, my body responded. I wanted her. God help me. I wanted her more than I'd ever wanted anything. And I could tell she felt it too. She wasn't just avoiding my gaze. She was fighting it, like she knew that if she looked at me too long, she'd lose whatever self-control she was clinging to. It was dangerous, and it was only going to get worse. Natalie didn't come home until noon. She barely acknowledged me, just tossed her purse on the table and headed upstairs for a shower. No explicación. No apology. Nothing. I should have been furious. I should have demanded answers. Instead, I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt too much. I spent the rest of the day trying to keep my distance from Katie, but that night, after the kids were asleep, I found her sitting on the back porch, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the stars. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. Can't sleep. She glanced at me, offering a small, knowing smile. Neither can you. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Katie, about last night. She exhaled sharply. I know. It was a mistake. A long pause. But, I prompted. Her lips parted slightly, and for a second, I thought she might say something else, might admit that she wanted me as badly as I wanted her. But then she shook her head, forcing a laugh. But nothing. It won't happen again. I nodded. Right. Neither of us moved. Neither of us walked away. And that was the moment I realized, whether we wanted to admit it or not, this wasn't over. Not even close. The first time I slept with Katie, it wasn't planned. It wasn't a decision. It was inevitable. It happened late one night, after Natalie had left for another one of her dinners, and the kids were fast asleep. I was in the living room, staring at the TV without really watching it, when Katie appeared in the doorway. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me, and I knew. My heart pounded as she stepped closer, hesitating for only a second before straddling my lap. Her hands were warm against my face, her lips parting just slightly, waiting, giving me one last chance to stop this. I didn't take it. I crushed my mouth to hers, groaning when she melted against me. I ran my hands up her thighs, gripping her waist, feeling the way she trembled beneath my touch. We didn't make it to the bedroom, didn't even make it to the couch. Right there, on the living room floor, I finally let myself have what I wanted, and I didn't regret a damn second of it. We told ourselves it was just once, just one night, but we were lying. The next night, she came to my room. The night after that, I went to hers. It became a routine, a secret, a need. We were reckless, desperate. She was the only thing that made me feel alive. And the worst part? I didn't want to stop. I was falling, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to be caught. Secrets have a way of unraveling, no matter how carefully you try to contain them. Katie and I had been playing with fire for weeks, stealing moments in the dead of night, brushing too close in the kitchen, exchanging glances that lingered too long. Every touch, every whispered confession, only pulled me deeper into something I knew I shouldn't want. I told myself we could keep it quiet. Then no one would know. I was wrong. It was a Wednesday night when everything changed. I had just come back from putting the kids to bed when I found Katie in the kitchen, staring at her phone. She didn't hear me come in, didn't even notice me until I was right behind her. I frowned. Everything okay? She flinched, locking her phone and forcing a smile. Yeah, fine. But I knew her too well by now. Talk to me. I stepped closer, gently tilting her chin up. Her eyes met mine, wide and uncertain. And that was when I saw it, fear. Real, raw fear. Katie, I said slowly. What's going on? She swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter. I need to tell you something. The way she said it sent an icy chill down my spine. Okay, I murmured. I'm listening. She hesitated for only a second before exhaling sharply. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like a live wire, sizzling between us, ready to explode. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Pregnant. My pulse pounded in my ears. My mouth went dry. Are you sure? She nodded, her hands trembling. I took 3 tests, all positive. Jesus Christ. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly, trying to process what this meant, what this changed. Everything. It changed everything. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the candle still burning from dinner. Katie stood across from me, her arms wrapped around herself. "Say something," she whispered. I looked up at her. I don't know what to say. A long silence stretched between us, suffocating. Then softly, "Are you mad?" I exhaled, shaking my head. "No, not at you. Because how the hell could I be mad at her? I had made this choice. I had been reckless. Now we were paying the price." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Does Natalie know?" Katie laughed bitterly. "Of course not." My stomach twisted. Are you going to keep it?" She looked at me sharply. "Of course I'm keeping it." I nodded, running a hand down my face. "Right. Okay." Another silence. Then she stepped closer, kneeling in front of me, resting her hands on my knees. "Mark, I don't regret this," she said softly. I looked at her, searching for hesitation, doubt, but all I saw was conviction. She meant it, and God help me, some part of me wanted to believe her. But the reality was suffocating. Natalie and I were still married. Katie was pregnant with my child, and there was no way in hell I could keep this a secret forever. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the future spiraling out of control. Natalie finding out. The kids finding out. Katie standing alone, carrying a baby neither of us had planned for. I wanted to do the right thing. But what was the right thing? I had already betrayed my marriage. But was I really supposed to walk away from this child? I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm outside. And I knew, no matter how much I tried to ignore it, this was only the beginning. Because secrets don't stay buried forever. And soon, everything would come crashing down. Secrets only stay hidden when no one is looking. For weeks, I lived in a haze of uncertainty, torn between the life I had built with Natalie and the one I had unknowingly created with Katie. I told myself I had time. Time to figure things out. Time to make a choice. But time has a way of running out when you need it most. And mine ran out the night Natalie came home and told me she was leaving me. It was late. The kids were already asleep. I was in the kitchen nursing a glass of whiskey, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the window when I heard the front door open. Natalie walked in like she wasn't about to detonate a bomb in the middle of our lives. She set her purse on the counter, glanced at me, then poured herself a drink. Something was off. She wasn't trying to hide her phone. She wasn't rushing upstairs to shower off the scent of another man. She just stood there, watching me. "Can we talk?" she finally said. I exhaled slowly, setting my glass down. "Yeah." She hesitated, biting her lip, then finally she sighed. "Mark, I don't think this is working anymore." The words didn't register at first. I just blinked at her. "What?" She exhaled sharply, looking away. "I think we should get a divorce." Silence. A deep, suffocating silence. And then I laughed. A bitter, humorless chuckle that I couldn't stop even as her face twisted in confusion. "Are you serious?" I asked, shaking my head. "You wanted this. You wanted an open marriage." "I know," she said, setting her glass down. "And I thought it would help, I really did. But," she sighed, running a hand through her hair, "I met someone." A sharp, slicing pain cut through my chest. Of course she had. She looked at me then, and for the first time in months, I saw real guilt in her eyes. "His name is Daniel," she admitted softly. "And I think I love him." A cold weight settled in my stomach. I should have been furious. I should have felt betrayed. But all I felt was relief. Relief that I didn't have to pretend anymore. Relief that I didn't have to be the one to end it. I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms. "So that's it." Natalie bit her lip. "I don't want to hurt you, Mark." I scoffed. Little late for that. She had the nerve to look hurt. "I thought you'd be okay with this. You could do the same. You have done the same." My stomach twisted. She didn't know. She had no idea about Katie, about the baby, and for some reason, I didn't tell her. I just exhaled slowly, nodding. "Fine." Natalie blinked, clearly expecting a fight. "Fine." I shrugged. "You want out? You're out." A flicker of something passed across her face. Relief, maybe. But there was something else too. Something uncertain. Like she had expected me to chase her. To fight for her. But I didn't. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't want her anymore. I didn't tell Katie right away. I should have. But I needed time to process. Natalie and I were over. But where did that leave me and Katie? Was this real? Was it just a mistake that had spiraled out of control? Or was it something more? 2 days later, I found myself outside Katie's room. The door was slightly ajar, candlelight flickering from inside. I knocked once. She turned, her eyes widening slightly when she saw me. Hey, hey. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. She searched my face. Something happened. I nodded. Natalie wants a divorce. Katie's lips parted slightly, but she didn't look surprised. Wow. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah. Silence stretched between us. Then, softly, in us. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. I don't know. Hurt flashed in her eyes, but she nodded, looking down. I stepped closer, tilting her chin up. Katie, I want this. I do, but I need to be sure. I need to be ready. Her lips trembled. And what if you never are? I swallowed hard, the weight of her question pressing down on me. Then I kissed her, not out of desperation, not out of guilt, but because I needed her. And for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, she needed me too. Some betrayals are expected. Some you see coming from a mile away, like a storm on the horizon. And some hit you like a knife to the gut, twisting deep when you least expect it. For weeks, I had been drowning in guilt over Katie, over Natalie, over the mess I had let my life become. I had spent sleepless nights wondering if I had ruined everything, wondering if I was making a mistake. I thought the worst had already happened. I was wrong, because the real betrayal was still coming, and it was going to change everything. It started with a single piece of paper, a legal document, divorce papers, served by Natalie's lawyer. I had expected them. Hell, I had been waiting for them. But it wasn't the papers that shook me. It was the name written on them. Daniel Carter. My stomach clenched as I stared at the page, my pulse pounding in my ears. No, it couldn't be. But deep down, I already knew. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I scrolled through my contacts. Katie picked up on the second ring. Hey, she said softly. I was just about to. What's your last name? A pause. A hesitation. Mark what? I clenched my jaw. Just tell me, Katie. A long silence. Then, barely above a whisper. Carter. The air left my lungs. I gripped the counter, my knuckles turning white. Daniel Carter. Katie Carter. Natalie's new boyfriend was her brother. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, Katie let out a shaky breath. Mark, I was going to tell you. I closed my eyes, swallowing the bitter taste in my throat. When? Soon, she whispered. I swear, I didn't plan for any of this to happen. Rage bubbled in my chest, hot and suffocating. You knew. This whole time you knew. She made a small, broken sound. I didn't know at first, I swear. But once I found out, I didn't know how to tell you. My jaw tightened. So instead, you just let it happen. Silence. That was my answer. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Jesus Christ. Mark, please, she whispered. This doesn't change anything. But it did. Because now, I wasn't just some guy who had fallen for the nanny. Now I was tangled in something bigger. Something worse. And I had no idea how to fix it. I didn't talk to Katie for 2 days. I didn't talk to Natalie either. I needed space. Time. I needed to wrap my head around the fact that I'd been played like a goddamn fool. But the universe wasn't done with me yet. Because on the third day, Daniel showed up at my house. I opened the door to find him standing on my porch, arms crossed, his jaw tight. We had never met before, but I knew exactly who he was. You must be Mark, he said, his voice smooth, confident. I clenched my fists. You've got some balls showing up here. He smirked. Figure we should finally talk. You and I have a lot in common. I stepped forward, getting in his face. We are not the same. He tilted his head, amused. Aren't we? You fucked my sister. I fucked your wife. Sounds pretty even to me. Rage exploded in my chest. Before I could stop myself, I grabbed him by the collar, shoving him back against the porch railing. His smirk didn't falter. If you're looking for a fight, he murmured, you won't win. I breathed hard, my entire body thrumming with fury. I wanted to hit him. God, I wanted to destroy him. But that wouldn't change anything. I let go, stepping back. Stay the hell away from me. Daniel straightened his shirt, shaking his head. You're mad at the wrong person, Mark. I narrow my eyes. What the hell does that mean? He exhaled, looking at me with something almost like pity. Ask Katie. Then he walked away, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that my wife had left me for this prick, or the fact that I had this sinking feeling he wasn't lying. I'd spent the last few weeks thinking I was the one making mistakes, the one falling into something forbidden. I thought my biggest regret was sleeping with Katie. I was wrong, because the truth, the real truth, was so much worse. And I was about to learn just how deep this rabbit hole went. I drove to Katie's apartment that night. I didn't text. I didn't call. I just showed up, pounding on her door like a man ready to start a war. She opened it, her eyes widening when she saw me. Mark! I pushed past her, stepping inside. You need to start talking. Now. She swallowed, shutting the door behind her. I don't. I turned, my voice sharp. What did Daniel mean? Her shoulders tensed. There it was. That hesitation. That flicker of guilt. I had my answer before she even spoke. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. Jesus Christ, Katie. I didn't lie to you, she blurted. I turned on her, eyes burning. Like hell you didn't. She flinched but stood her ground. Mark, I swear, I didn't plan for this to happen. Then tell me what the fuck is going on. She hesitated for only a second before exhaling shakily. Daniel told me to seduce you. Silence. A deep, suffocating silence. And then, I felt my stomach drop. My entire body went rigid. My pulse pounded in my ears. What? I breathed. Katie's voice was small, breaking. At first, it was just a way to push you and Natalie apart. He thought if you cheated, she'd file for divorce sooner. I felt sick. I felt sick. All this time, I thought Katie and I were drawn together by something real, something painful but real. It was all a fucking setup. I ran a hand down my face, trying to breathe through the fury boiling inside me. She stepped closer, reaching for me, her fingers brushing my arm. Mark, I didn't mean to fall for you, but I did. I jerked away from her touch like she burned me. My chest ached, my head spinning. She had played me. They had both played me. And I had let it happen. I didn't stay. I couldn't. I drove around for hours, my mind racing, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Everything felt like a goddamn joke. Natalie, Daniel, Katie, the entire fucking situation. I had thought I was the one making bad decisions. But I was never even in control. I was just another pawn in their twisted little game. And the worst part? I still didn't know who the hell I could trust. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to hear it from him. I needed to face Daniel. So I found him, at a coffee shop, sitting at a corner table like he didn't have a care in the world. I walked straight to him, ignoring the looks from the other customers as I grabbed the chair across from him and sat down. He smirked. Mark, good to see you. I clenched my jaw. Cut the shit. His smirk widened, and I wanted to wipe it off his face. But I needed answers first. So, I said, voice tight, how long have you been planning this? Daniel leaned back, sipping his coffee. You mean, how long have I been waiting to take your wife? My blood boiled, but I didn't take the bait. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. I mean, how long have you been using your own sister to fuck with my life? His smirk faltered. Good. For the first time, I saw something shift in his expression. Something dark. Daniel, I pressed, my voice low, steady. Tell me the truth. A long silence. Then finally, he exhaled, rubbing his jaw. It wasn't supposed to go this far. My stomach twisted. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't even surprised I'd figured it out. I clenched my fists beneath the table. You used her. He looked at me then, his gaze eerily calm. We both used her. A punch to the gut. A truth I didn't want to face. Because the worst part? He wasn't wrong. I had used Katie. I had taken comfort in her. Let myself fall into something I shouldn't have. But the difference was I never meant to hurt her. And I sure as hell never meant to be played. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. You're a piece of shit, I muttered. Daniel just shrugged. And yet, I still got what I wanted. I turned and walked away before I did something I couldn't take back. But as I stepped out into the cold morning air, one thought burned in my mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I should have walked away from all of it. From Natalie. From Daniel. From Katie. I should have packed a bag, taken the kids, and never looked back. But life isn't that simple. Especially when there's a child involved. Especially when, despite everything, I still couldn't stop thinking about Katie. Natalie and I didn't argue about the details. There were no dramatic screaming matches. No fights over who hurt whom more. We were past that. It was quiet. Numb. "I'll take the house," she said one afternoon, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. I nodded. "Fine. And the kids? We share custody." My voice was firm, unshaking. 50-50. She hesitated, then nodded. That was it. 15 years of marriage boiled down to signatures on a few pieces of paper. And just like that, it was over. I didn't see Katie for a week. She didn't text, didn't call, and I didn't reach out either. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how. Were we now? What the hell did we mean to each other after everything that had happened? I still didn't have an answer the night she showed up at my door. She stood there, hands in the pockets of her jacket, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. She looked tired, and she looked just as lost as I felt. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I exhaled, stepping aside. "Yeah." We sat on the couch, an entire foot of space between us. A month ago, that space wouldn't have existed. A month ago, we wouldn't have been able to keep our hands off each other. Now, all that was left was uncertainty. "I'm sorry," Katie whispered. I turned to look at her. She met my gaze, her green eyes glassy. "I should have told you sooner." "About Daniel." I swallowed hard, nodding. "Yeah." A long silence. Then, softly, "Do you hate me?" The question hit me like a punch to the ribs. I stared at her, my chest tight. "No," I admitted. "I don't." Another pause. She exhaled, wiping at her eyes. "I don't know what to do, Mark." Neither did I. So I did the only thing I could. I reached out, sliding my fingers through hers, squeezing gently. "You're having my child." She nodded. "So we figured out." Her lips trembled. "Together?" I hesitated. Then finally I nodded. "Yeah," I murmured. "Together." For now, it was all I could promise. And for now, it was enough. 2 weeks later, I sat in a doctor's office, watching a black and white screen as a heartbeat flickered in the center. Our child, mine and Katie's. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Terrified, overwhelmed. But when Katie looked at me, her eyes wide, her fingers trembling in mine, I knew I wasn't going anywhere. Whatever this was, whatever we were in it, and there was no turning back. The divorce was finalized on a cold, rainy Thursday. It should have felt like freedom, like a weight had finally been lifted from my chest. Instead, it just felt empty. Natalie and I didn't exchange many words as we walked out of the courthouse. There wasn't much left to say. We stood there for a moment, the rain pattering softly around us, both of us hesitating, knowing this was the last time we would ever stand together as husband and wife. She exhaled, crossing her arms. "Do you ever think if things had been different?" I gave her a small, sad smile. "Maybe." A long pause. Then she nodded, pulling her coat tighter around herself. "Goodbye, Mark. Goodbye, Natalie." And just like that, she turned and walked away. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to chase after her. Katie moved in 2 months before the baby was due. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't some grand, sweeping declaration of love. It was practical. We were about to have a child together, and no matter what our past looked like, we needed to figure out our future. Some nights, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the right decision. If we were making a mistake. If what we had was real, or just the result of 2 broken people clinging to each other when they had nothing else. But then there were moments, small, quiet moments, that made me think maybe, just maybe, we had something worth holding on to. Like the way she instinctively reached for my hand when the baby kicked for the first time, or the way she fit so perfectly against me when she fell asleep on the couch, or the way she looked at me, really looked at me, like I was worth something, like I was hers. I thought I knew what fear was. I had faced betrayal, heartbreak, anger, loss, but nothing compared to the pure terror of watching Katie in labor, gripping my hand so tight I thought she might break it. Hours passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion and whispered reassurances. Then, finally, A sharp, newborn cry filled the room. And just like that, my entire world changed. The nurse placed our daughter in Katie's arms, and for a moment, I could do nothing but stare. She was so small, so perfect. Katie turned to me, her eyes full of tears, and I felt something in my chest crack wide open. I reached out, running a trembling finger over my daughter's impossibly tiny hand. And in that moment, I knew, no matter what happened, no matter how complicated our story was, I wasn't going anywhere. This was my family, and I would fight for it. Life didn't magically fall into place after that. It took work, trust, time. But day by day, Katie and I built something real. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And for the first time in a long time, I was happy. Maybe even truly happy. Because love isn't about perfect beginnings. It's about choosing someone again and again, despite the flaws, despite the mistakes, despite the past. And as I stood in our living room, holding my daughter in my arms, Katie curled up beside me. I knew I had finally made the right choice. The past was behind us. The future was ours to build. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid.